Welcome to Top 10 Nerd. Well, it's that magical time of year where Marvel and DC fans can come together and argue over who is the superior publisher while wearing truly heinous looking sweaters.
But one thing I think we can agree on is that Santa, that guy slays.
While Saint Nick has shown up in both Marvel and DC, his appearances in Marvel are just a little bit more astounding and kind of confusing.
So, we're gonna talk about it.
This year, as a special stocking stuffer for the best group of viewers on the whole internet, we will be attempting to explain Marvel Comics' Santa Claus.
Oh boy. Where does Santa come from? The age-old question so many of us have been wondering what the answer to is for years. I'm still wondering, but don't worry, children and adults of all kinds, I'm gonna tell you the answer. At least I will tell you in regards to what we know of Santa from his origin over at Marvel Comics. For the real Santa, I can't really say. I'm sworn to secrecy. Santa gets his existence and power from humanity's belief in him though at Marvel Comics. Kinda like the gods from the Distinguished Competition, aka DC Comics, or at least the gods from DC's Vertigo imprint. The gods showcased in Neil Gaiman's The Sandman seem to get their power from humanity's belief and need for them. So as some gods become less influential and important in humanity's day-to-day life, they also become less powerful, basically shadows of their former selves. With Santa, there are three people he is often mistaken for, and whose origins people often mistakenly attribute to him. Though if Santa was brought to life by kind of like all three of these legendary figures, then I suppose in a way it's not a mistake because all of their origins kind of are his origins. Anyways, who are these three legends, you ask? Well, one story suggests that Santa Claus is possibly actually none other than, or at least inspired by, the story of Odin's generosity one midwinter night. That's right, we are talking about Odin, the Allfather of Asgard. Some people think of Santa as Odin. Oh boy. This story takes place on a night where a village's midwinter's feast was under threat, while at the same time, so was the existence of Asgard. Asgard had been threatened by Grylak the Greater, a troll who threatened to destroy the realm of Asgard with an asteroid if he was not given control of it by the Allfather. You know Odin is not gonna just do that, but anyways. At the same time on Earth, Sigurd and his crew were returning home to the feast when their boat was caught in a really bad storm. Sia, Sigurd's wife, prayed for the safety of her husband and his crew to Odin. Odin, being the wise god he is, and the super nice god he is, at least in Marvel Comics, decided to solve both problems simultaneously. He had Thor gather materials for the feast from Asgard, find linens, food, and wine, then he had Thor use Mjolnir to obliterate the asteroid. The flash of light from the destructive explosion helped Sigurd and his crew sail on safely home. Odin brought the resources gathered to Sia as gifts, disappearing on a sleigh afterwards pulled by flying rams before Sigurd returned, calling out, "A good midwinter to all, and to all a good life." Another theory suggests that Santa is actually the spirit of the winter season, or at least once was. This idea is inspired by an alleged custom from pre-medieval Britain. The custom involved elders of communities dressing up in furs and being referred to as Old Winter while traveling from home to home. The thought here was that those who showed kindness to Old Winter would also be showed kindness by the winter season. Respect and kindness equals respect and kindness. I like it, makes sense. Following the rise of Christianity, the central character of the custom was changed somewhat from Old Winter to Old Christmas, and then to Old Father Christmas, before finally becoming simply known as Father Christmas. Finally, one of the other common stories, possibly the most common story in modern times, is that of Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was a man from the area near what we now know as Turkey, hailing from the 4th century where he became the Bishop of Myra. Nicholas was known for his kind heart, his giving nature, his love of children, and for making miracles happen. Ooh, miracles. Many stories were told about him, but the most famous one involves him helping a family to pay for their daughter's dowries by sneaking gold into their house. I don't know why you wouldn't just give them the gold, but hey. After a few attempts, he succeeded in this one night when he had managed to get a bag of gold down the family's chimney. The gold supposedly appeared the morning after in stockings that had been left out to dry over the fireplace. Ooh, Christmassy. Nicholas did not brag about his good deeds and himself was pretty humble, but eventually word of his charity and the miracles he seemingly caused spread, causing him to become celebrated by people even outside of Myra. People often made a habit of attributing unexpected gifts and mysterious acts of charity to him. Following his death, a church was built in his honor. Tales of St. Nicholas would eventually make their way to the ears of Russian royalty, who decided to make St. Nicholas the patron saint of Russia. Tales also spread spread to the Netherlands, where he was initially known as Sint Nicholas, then Santa Claus, which would go on to inspire the name Santa Claus. Get it? December 5th became a day of giving in his honor, being the day before he died. However, this tradition would then be combined with the story of the birth of Jesus, with December 25th becoming the day that we celebrate instead, now known as Christmas. Santa, however, is kind of like a combination of all these figures, but also is his own thing. When humanity's belief combined with the three legends and spiritual energy, we got a recipe for one Santa Claus, please. Santa is believed to be a physical manifestation of generosity, something that all three legends share in theme. But he also might be a mutant. More on that later. After coming into being, Santa set up his home base in Finland, initially in a city known as Korventunturi. He would ride around on horseback delivering presents on Christmas morning. Later, he'd upgrade his operation after he met and married Mrs. Claus. They would move to the North Pole and create a workshop there before expanding his empire further by employing a workforce of elves, mainly made up of the light elves of Elfheim, to help them in creating gifts and toys. In regards to Santa's first appearance in Marvel Comics, it's super weird, but that's kind of what I love about it, so here we go. Santa's first appearance happened in November of 1955 in Strange Tales issue number 34, where he appeared as a magical, jolly fellow who also has a really sweet red car. Now that's my kind of Santa. The story begins at a garage and service station where we are introduced to Sammy Glenn, who works as a station attendant. Sammy is apparently both a genius and a man with a big generous heart, but simply with the worst luck in all of his life. After all, how else did he end up working here? Could it be a lack of ambition, or I don't know, simply due to his low self-esteem? Definitely not. It's just something that happened to poor Sammy and that he has zero control over, I'm sure. Sammy spends some time feeling bad for himself, inner monologue style, before getting shamed by an old friend, Ben Graham, who stops by to get gas, with Ben taking every opportunity to rag on Sammy for being too nice. Because apparently the theme of Sammy's life is nice guys finish last while jerks only ever succeed, I guess. The next day at work, a mysterious man arrives. He ends up presumably getting a top up on gas and a car tune-up because he decides to leave his car there for 6 hours. That's gotta be some kind of tune-up, that's a long time. The man asks Sammy to watch his things closely because he refuses to lock up anything and secure his own valuables. So that's on Sammy. Even though Sammy is tipped well and presumably the car is there to have something done to it for 6 hours, Sammy decides to dress up in the man's clothes and takes his car for a joyride to give himself a taste of the high life. He drives back home to rub his pretend success in everybody's face. Yep, what a nice guy he is. I'll parade my success in front of their bulging eyes. Wes Morrow, the banker, Madge Grammer, the girl who turned me down, Jim Leverett, the lawyer. I'll look up Jim first. So it turns out Jim's dead. Madge looks like she's about to die after having 4 kids and apparently a failure of a husband, and Wes is now homeless. Disappointed in how everyone that came out of his hometown, including himself, turned out to be a failure, Sammy heads to an exclusive executive club for a drink before returning the car, and is surprised that he actually succeeds to get in. Another theme in this weird holiday story: fake it till you make it. Sammy meets a woman who mistakes him for another club member and asks him what he does. When he tells her that he's in between jobs but is hoping to get a job in engineering research, she decides to just give him her number. Super realistic, I think. A man overhears Sammy is looking for work in engineering and straight up offers him a job in the field, because the man thinks Sammy is a bona fide club member. I can't believe it! I'm Sammy Glenn, the guy who never had a break in his life! Suddenly, a beautiful woman falls for me, the president of a big corporation offers me a top job. From nobody, suddenly I'm somebody. I have money, success. Why? Because Santa, that's why. The final panels reveal that the garage calendar shows today as Christmas. And who is the mystery man who left his car, suit, and belongings unsecured? Why, Santa, of course. Apparently, if you pity yourself enough and temporarily steal Santa's belongings for an afternoon, you too can have it all, thanks to the miracle of Christmas. This is where I'd have glitter and I'd throw it. Hold up! As a gift to us, why not like this video and subscribe for more Top 10 Nerd? Seriously, the miracle of Christmas, you gotta do it, okay? Bye.
Now we're gonna move on to Santa Claus's major appearances. A lot of Santa's appearances have been in passing, like in the Strange Tales of the Unusual short story where a Scrooge-like man has a change of heart during Christmas and Santa just waltzes on by and at the end of the story and says, Good job. Now, because that's rather boring, I'm going to talk about some of his more interesting appearances after his first really weird one. Starting with his notable appearances in Howard the Duck Volume 2 Issue 3, with a release date of December 4th, 1979 and a cover date of February 1980. Because the world is constantly changing and we as humans as a species are constantly advancing and growing, and because Santa is hella old, he decides to try and modernize to fit in. He cuts down his beard to be more slick, he rebuilds his sleigh to be self-propelled using Roxxon Oil's high-octane fuel instead of subjecting his reindeer to the emotional and physical stress of doing the job, and he also opened up a nuclear power plant and a gas station up in the North Pole. Unfortunately, one of the villainous workers at the plant, named Greedy Killerwatt, decided he was going to take over Christmas as revenge against society for a mutation that made him look like a light bulb. He convinced a convict named Pinball Lizard, who Santa had hired for his fun and games department, to try and bring Santa down by not putting enough gas in his sleigh so that the big man would crash. And in his absence, they would take over the toy workshop, forcing the elves to make mass-produced toys that just straight up suck. Luckily though, when Santa's sleigh crashed, the crash happened in Cleveland, where Santa ran into Howard the Duck. They, Howard and Santa, return to the North Pole, where a battle breaks out between Santa, Howard, and the loyal forces of North Pole against the mutated villains and their mutated animal minions. But that wasn't his only Howard the Duck story. In Howard the Duck Holiday Special Volume 1, Issue 1 from 1996, we got a story called Wreck the Malls with Hydra's Folly, where the old jolly guy becomes just upset with humanity's lack of faith and belief, so he sells the entire gift-making and giving Christmas enterprise to Hydra. This time, Howard the Duck was working as a mall Santa, and he gets recruited by an elf alongside a bunch of other mall Santas to save Christmas. Now his next big appearance, and probably one of Santa's most notable ones, was in Marvel Holiday Special Volume 1, released on November 19th, 1991, with a cover date of December 1991. In a little story called A Miracle a Few Blocks Down from 34th Street, 'twas the day before Christmas, and all through the Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, Cerebro detected what it called the most powerful mutant ever registered, who had just miraculously appeared in New York's Rockefeller Center. The X-Men obviously went off to investigate, but this massively powerful mutant was also detected by a group of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who also went to try and capture the mutant for their own evil purposes, resulting in a clash between the two factions. But this mutant just happened to be Santa Claus himself, who used his insane power to briefly transform the Brotherhood into toys. He teleported the X-Men away, erased everyone's memory, and then made it snow, giving New York the first white Christmas in a hot minute. Next up, in Sensational She-Hulk Volume 1, number 8, and also number 36, released August 1st, 1989 and December 3rd, 1991, respectively. At this time in his life, Santa Claus had decided that, with his ability to know who was naughty and nice, he would make an absolutely show-stealing detective. So that's what he does, becoming Nick St. Christopher. And together with She-Hulk, they take on the investigation of a killer. He even gets the hots for old Jennifer Walters, which gets Mrs. Claus a little bit jealous. By the end of the story, he gives Jen a gift that allows her to temporarily transform into her human form so she can have a normal Christmas with her family. So nice. Now for the next Santa story, we can look to Marvel Age Volume 1, number 109 from February of 1992. This story, told by Captain America to some kids, takes us back in time to December 1943, when the leader of the German Axis forces during World War II, who will remain nameless, captured Santa Claus to try and destroy the morale of the USA. But President Franklin Roosevelt sent the heroes Nick Fury, Captain America, and James Bucky Barnes to rescue old Saint Nick. There was also Marvel Holiday Spectacular magazine from 2009, which contained the story from a continuity that never existed: Santa Claus versus the Illuminati. Here, Iron Man calls together the Illuminati because it turns out that all of Santa's reindeer were actually Skrulls. With no way to make his Christmas deliveries the traditional way, the Illuminati instead give Claus the Infinity Gems and Infinity Gauntlet, which actually corrupted the Saint. Luckily, Namor got him with a snowball to the schnauzer that knocked him over and caused the gauntlet to fall off. Instead of giving Santa the assembled Infinity Gauntlet, Iron Man just makes Santa some robotic reindeer. Why he didn't do that in the first place? I don't know, I just work here. Last but not least, by any stretch of the imagination, we have got to talk about Deadpool Volume 7, Issue number 7, released in December of 2018. Discovering that on Christmas Day no one had delivered their presents, a group of enraged children, who seem to be between the age of 5 and 9, find Deadpool's hideout and hire the mercenary with money from a Go Pay Me campaign to take out the Big Claus himself for failing them. You see, Santa has been doing his thing for a long time, but that doesn't make him any good at running a business. Instead, one of his elves named Tinsel took the lead in organizing all of the operations of the North Pole. But Tinsel wanted to bring in outside help to cut the cost of their operation, and Santa ain't no sellout, except for that one time with Hydra. So he refuses. Tinsel, being the little troublemaker that he is, went around and convinced all the other elves that Santa was oppressing them, and he convinced them to all do a little walkout. Santa didn't take this too well and let himself go and became a massive manic mess. But like all of these stories, you'll have to read it yourself for all the fun little details because we're moving on. But before we do that, just some honorable mentions. Absolutely check out Power Man and Iron Fist's Sweet Christmas Annual from 2016 to see Santa take on Krampus himself, and King in Black Iron Man / Doom number 1 from 2021 to see those two directly take on Santa and question their own beliefs. Now, we're actually moving on.
Powers and abilities. Marvel's Santa has a wide variety of powers and abilities, but the source of his powers seems to be a bit inconsistent. In the Marvel Holiday Special of 1991, which Adam already talked about, where Cerebro informs them that it has located the most powerful mutant on Earth, this implies that the powers he uses in his appearances are manifestations of his mutation, such as when he turns the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants into action figures and then teleports the X-Men away from him with a touch of his nose, wiping their minds of the interaction in the process. However, in a breakdown of the character featured in Marvel Holiday Spectacular 2009, where they talk about his powers, he is said to be using magic to accomplish his feats, and they never bring up the fact that he's a mutant, let alone the most powerful one on Earth. There is some contention as to whether the ability to use magic is a mutant power or a separate thing, but whatever the source of his abilities, they are undeniably amazing. They are for the most part similar to the powers attributed to most other versions of the character, but with that slight Marvel weirdness. He is immortal, having looked like an old man for centuries, and seems to have reality-altering powers, being able to turn people into toys as mentioned before. Although his flying reindeer were apparently a gift from Odin, he can also magically empower animals, such as when he made a group of huskies capable of flight when his reindeer were rendered unavailable. Lending further credence to the magic theory, his strength is doubled on Christmas Eve, making him capable of lifting up to 2 tons. He also accomplishes many of his feats with the help of magical artifacts. For example, his sack is really a tesseract that creates a portal to another dimension that he uses to store the various gifts he needs to deliver. Although he is usually drawn as a white guy, he is actually using a psychic mirroring ability that will make him appear as the same race as whoever is looking at him. Speaking of psychic powers, he of course is able to determine who is naughty and who is nice, which he also uses to be the world's greatest detective, like when he teamed up with She-Hulk in Sensational She-Hulk number 8. Perhaps his most impressive feat of magic was in the Gwenpool Holiday Special, when he removed himself from Christmas to take a year off and made everyone on Earth forget him, and made it so that it was Galactus who gave gifts to the well-behaved children. Although this did cause a side effect of other holidays being affected, such as when Thanksgiving became Pantsgiving, where everyone gives each other tight hot pants. He prefers not to use his powers for combat, but that doesn't mean he is a slouch in that department. In his appearance in Deadpool Volume 7 number 7, he and Deadpool enter an intense brawl, and though he is ultimately no match for Deadpool, he does hold his own in the fight. Despite his incredible powers, he is often depicted being kidnapped by supervillains in his appearances and needing to be rescued by the heroes. It's frankly kind of bizarre that he can apparently rewrite reality to make Galactus the bringer of gifts, but can't escape from a comically oversized bear trap on Dr. Doom's roof without help.
You might know Mr. Sinister from the 90s X-Men animated series as a creepy guy with a flamboyant look, and from the comics as a mad scientist with a love of capes. But he is so much more than that. Mr. Sinister has been manipulating mutants behind the scenes for centuries. Name a mutant and he's probably influenced their life or just straight up manipulated it. I'm your host Amanda McKnight, and today I'll be attempting to explain the jaw-dropping retcons and insidious machinations that have made Mr. Sinister the masterful villain and genetic genius he is today. Oh boy, here we go. Let's see if I survive this video. Woo! Who is Mr. Sinister? Mr. Sinister was originally known as Nathaniel Essex. He is one of the greatest mutant geneticists the world over. Over the years, he has perfected the cloning process, created chimeras, sparked new life, altered his own DNA to make himself mutant, manipulated others' powers, increasing, decreasing, or better focusing them, and has augmented victims with his own DNA, altering them forever by kind of bonding them to himself. Before we travel back in time to the beginning of Mr. Sinister's weird and wacky story and origin, let's talk about his comic book origins in regards to his first chronological appearance. Mr. Sinister was first mentioned following the devastating attack on the Morlocks, often referred to in the comics as the Mutant Massacre. Following the attack in issue 212 of Uncanny X-Men, we get the first mention of him. Wolverine is hot on the trail of those responsible attempting to hunt them down when he runs into Sabretooth, because of course Sabretooth is involved in this dastardly plot. Startled by Sabretooth's appearance in the sewers, but not at all shocked, Wolverine exclaims, "You're part of this?" Sabretooth responds, "Yep," adding, "Mr. Sinister's dealing a game that don't allow for wild cards like the Morlocks, or you X-chumps either. So he sent the Marauders to resolve the situation, cause we're the very best there is at what we do, like you used to be." This was the first mention of Mr. Sinister, who would make his first visual appearance almost 10 issues later in issue 221 of the series. Sporting pointed teeth and a scowl that to gaze upon would likely leave you paralyzed with fear, Mr. Sinister's ghostly white nightmarish face appears on the very first page of this issue. He lets out a growl expressing his disappointment in how the team have failed to eliminate one of his creations, Madeline Pryor, who he wanted destroyed and disposed of to cover up his own connection to her. "You failed me, Marauders, and failure is something Mr. Sinister does not tolerate." I'm here for it. I'm here for the creepy stuff. Mr. Sinister is one of my favorites. Mr. Sinister's connection to both the Morlocks and Madeline Pryor run even deeper than you can imagine though, and extend all the way back to Victorian England, and the character's origins as he transformed from Nathaniel Essex, esteemed scientist, to something much more, well, sinister. As a child, Nathaniel Essex loved watching the busy flow of traffic. He enjoyed studying the patterns of people's movement and predicting which way people would go, observing that they always seemed to follow preordained paths. This would be the beginning of Essex's obsession with predictions. In the limited team-up series, Further Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, we learn more about Essex's origins. I also just love the art in this series. It's kind of a cool series to revisit. I like that I get to do this video so I can revisit it. Here we learned that as a man, Mr. Sinister was actually a respected scientist who married Rebecca Milbury, back when he was of course Nathaniel Essex. Tragically, their young son passed away as the result of multiple birth defects. Struggling with grief, Nathaniel coped by burying himself in his work, struggling to accept the passing of his son. Essex became obsessed with Darwin's theory of evolution. He believed too many scientists were limited by their morals when it came to ideas and experiments. Why do we have morals? Ugh, what a waste of time. I don't have time for these morals. Essex predicted the existence of mutants, believing they would emerge as a result of natural evolution. He predicted that humanity would evolve rapidly thanks to what he referred to as Essex factors. You know you're a scientist when you're naming things after yourself. As a result of this far-out theory and questionable experiments, he was disgraced and kicked out of the Royal Society, though really due to his questionable experiments, which were pretty Frankensteinish, to be honest. Around this time, Essex would ally with his first ever team of Marauders. Not these Marauders. These Marauders! And have them collect all sorts of deformed ne'er-do-wells from the streets of London to become his unwilling test subjects in mad science experiments. While working for Essex, the Marauders woke up the powerful mutant known as Apocalypse, who had been in hibernation. Apocalypse asked to meet the leader of the Marauders and was taken to him, posing as a man intrigued by Essex's theories on evolution. During their interaction, Essex learned that his predictions had been correct, as En Sabinur was Apocalypse, a mutant. The duo ran into a time-traveling Cyclops and Phoenix, who were sent back in time by the Ascani. While Nathaniel is tempted to join Apocalypse here, he ultimately instead decides to passionately commit himself to his family and his wife running home, because Rebecca does not like how obsessed he has become of late with his work. Unfortunately, upon returning home, he learns that his wife, Rebecca, has learned of his secret, very creepy experiments and his prisoners, and has freed them all. As a result of the stress of this revelation, she also went into early labor and is now basically on the brink of death. While on her deathbed, she refuses to forgive Nathaniel, labeling him as utterly and contemptibly sinister. Whew, fair. Rebecca's speaking some truths as she dies. Mourning the death of his wife and loss of his family, he ultimately returns to Apocalypse, deciding to become his ally in the end. I mean, I guess what else are you gonna do? Apocalypse is a mutant who perfectly represents Essex's hypothesis regarding mutants and evolution. Apocalypse is his theory in essence come to life. Apocalypse painfully genetically mutates Essex using celestial technology, making him his first prelate, which is also, you know, just how Apocalypse do. With Nathaniel taking for himself the name his wife gave to him on her deathbed. Sinister. Sinister allowed Apocalypse to remove his humanity from him, leaving him with no moral code to speak of going forward. However, in his fight against Cyclops and Phoenix, he found himself pretty fascinated by them. Believing Apocalypse, his new master, to be cruel, without purpose, and therefore insane, Sinister decided to reject him, betraying him by unleashing a deadly plague that Apocalypse had him make, but only releasing it on his master, thereby forcing Apocalypse to return to hibernation. Sinister would go on to say that cruelty without purpose was ignorance, and that ignorance was the greatest enemy of science. But if you're cruel and you have a purpose, then you're just apparently a great scientist to Mr. Sinister. Phoenix and Cyclops returned to the future, and while their mission to seemingly stop Apocalypse was successful, it would turn out that the true plan Clan Ascani had for them was to inspire Sinister to set into motion plans that would one day lead to the birth of Nathan Summers, aka Nathan Dayspring, aka Cable. So yeah, that's how closely tied Mr. Sinister is to the Summers family. His obsession surrounding the Summers and the Greys in the future would actually come from his interaction with their future selves who had journeyed into the past. Wild, right? I hope you're following me with this timey-wimey stuff. In the 1999 Gambit comic series, we learned Sinister had moved from England to America. Sinister's appearance in Gambit series also makes sense given their history, where Sinister was shown to be a regretful ally, later enemy, who Gambit becomes indebted to. Although that wouldn't happen until the future. The future past? The future. Confusing. Time travel again. But we'll talk about that part later anyways. While in the Americas, Sinister would adopt the name of Dr. Nathan Milbury, taking his wife's surname. He would run the Essex Clinic as an obstetrician. There he would also continue to conduct morally devoid experiments, and would even continue to study the genetics of Daniel Summers, one of his prisoners and test subjects back in England who had escaped. Or at least Daniel had thought he escaped. Essex, apparently, he didn't, unfortunately. Sinister would also experiment on Amanda Mueller, and made deals with her to acquire several of her babies after they were born for his own purposes. Amanda Mueller would go on to become one of the founders of Weapon X, an evil woman tied to the Summers family tree known as Black Womb, and Daniel Summers also tied. For more on Amanda Mueller and Daniel, you can check out our part 2 video for attempting to explain the Summers family tree. Despite Gambit not actually being alive at the time, in terms of like he wasn't really born yet because it's the past, Sinister would first meet him in 1891. This was possible because Gambit and a shapeshifting mutant named Courier had traveled back in time. Upon meeting Sinister, the two made their first deal. Sinister agreed to free Thieves Guild members and give Gambit information in exchange for a sample of Courier's genome. Sinister would blend Courier's genes and abilities with his own and end up teaming up temporarily with Gambit. However, the Thieves Guild members involved would have their memories wiped and therefore would not remember these events. So, in case you're wondering why they don't remember, that's why. At this point, Sinister was not yet Mr. Sinister, to be clear, but was known simply as just Sinister. The name change might not seem like a big difference, but in regards to the character and his identity, it actually is. Mr. Sinister had a completely different personality in comparison, being more feral in nature. This personality actually developed after Sinister returned to his old home, the Milbury house, in 1895, to conduct more experiments. It was then that he learned he was dying and developed the Mr. Sinister persona. He had a kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing going on in regards to this split, struggling with episodes as he continued to deteriorate. Essex would run into Mystique and Destiny, who found him him as part of their own investigation. They had him taken to Bedlam, where he died overnight. However, this wouldn't be the end for Sinister, as we learn in Immortal X-Men issue number 8. Mystique and Destiny would learn that prior to his death, Sinister had cloned himself 4 times, with the goal of surviving in clone forms to the 20th century and beyond. Each one of his clones was marked by a symbol belonging to a different card deck suit. The Diamond clone is still known as Mr. Sinister and is a mutant. The clone of Clubs we know is Dr. Stasis, who appears to be human. The other remain unknown at the time of this recording, though I imagine the Sins of Sinister event will shed some more light on their stories, and we might actually know more if there's something that I missed or didn't read, which, if that's true, let me know in the comments because I'd love to read it.
When people speak on the strongest superheroes in Marvel Comics, Thor, Odin's son, God of Thunder, is always among the top of the pack. But there was a time where Thor reached a level of power that we have never seen before, and I'm gonna tell you about it. I'm Adam Andrews with Top 10 Nerd, and I'm going to attempt to explain Rune King Thor. Okay, so back in the day, meaning the early 2000s, Marvel started to gear itself up for its Civil War event, splitting the superhero community down the center with the Superhuman Registration Act. As some of you may know, there were 2 extremely powerful characters who existed at this time, but yet were not present during the events of Civil War. These were Thor and Hulk. Basically, these guys are simply just too powerful for the Civil War event to work with their inclusion. If Thor or the Hulk took a side in the conflict, that side would win. Period. So, Marvel came up with 2 solutions. First, the Illuminati send Hulk into space with Planet Hulk. Boom, Hulk is gone. Secondly, we get Thor disassembled, or Ragnarok, to keep him busy with Asgardian issues while the world's heroes fight each other. So that's the reason why all this comes to pass, but to get an understanding of what leads up to Ragnarok and Thor Disassembled, we have to look back to Dan Jurgens' Thor run from 1998 to 2004. A lot of the early parts of this run won't play a part in the events we are focusing on, but a few things do obviously matter. For starters, in this run of Thor, the Odin son has been sharing his existence as 2 people, similar to when he was Donald Blake. On one hand, he is indeed the God of Thunder, but due to actions earlier in the comic run, he has an alter ego in the form of Jake Olsen. Jake isn't terribly important to the story, and honestly, I found myself getting kind of annoyed anytime he would switch from Thor to Jake, but Thor's time as Jake did help teach the God of Thunder a level of humanity he might not have gotten the same way. Except he totally got it when he was Donald Blake, but those are the details we don't need to talk about. Another key thing about this run would be the death of Odin and rise of Thor to the throne of Asgard. Now before that actually comes to pass, a character called Zarko the Tomorrow Man has a fear of a possible future where Thor is the key part of something called the Reigning, where Thor becomes the iron-fisted ruler of Earth. When this whole part of the story actually kicks off in issue number 36 of volume 2, Thor has to fight the Destroyer armor that Loki had brought to the forefront. It was told to Odin by the Watcher that if Thor beat the Destroyer, then the Reigning will come to pass, but Odin helps Thor against the Destroyer anyways. Now, around this same time, a fisherman from Norway named Sven gets possessed by Surtur and begins rallying others to his cause, turning them into fire demons, eventually allowing Surtur himself to emerge from a massive bonfire in Norway. In issue number 40, Asgard's warriors go to face Surtur with everyone joining in the fight, whether they're ready or not. Odin shows up and mustering all the power he can, he goes on a final attack against Surtur that takes both of their lives. Now moving on to Lord Thor. From the start, Thor's ascent to the throne was pretty shaky. Initially, he did not want to be king of Asgard at all, and he didn't even believe Odin was actually gone, but alas, he was. And after speaking with Jake Olsen, Thor realizes he has to take the throne. I should probably also mention that Odin did split Thor and Jake Olsen into 2 separate beings at this point in time. So he does take the throne, and Lady Thor, aka Tureen, aka the Designate, takes his place on Midgard. The start was shaky, and honestly, Thor ends up being a pretty bad king. He is harsh, he lacks patience, and he makes some really questionable choices with the Odin Force power he now wields. Choices like going off off fighting frost giants, getting together with Amora the Enchantress of all people, and in a really odd move, Thor decides that Asgard should invade Earth. Now Thor uses the resources at Asgard's command to try and forcibly solve all of Midgard's problems, which is something Odin would never have done. Instead of trying to lead humans to be better, he just solves our problems for us, and while there is a lot of good done by this, a lot of people are resistant to it. A coalition of different countries stage an attack against Asgard itself, destroying both it and New York City, pushing Thor even further into becoming a sort of mad dictator. He failed the Korenkakta, which is the test of character put in place by the Council of Godheads, and if that weren't enough, Thor eventually becomes unworthy of Mjolnir when he takes the life of Jake Olsen, who is trying to stop Thor at that time. Thor gains religious followers, makes enemies of friends of his, fights and imprisons other Avengers, but he does indeed become the ruler of Earth over the next 200 years. Now in this somewhat dystopian Asgardian ruled future, Loki is the Sorcerer Supreme and All-Father Thor's chief advisor and head of security, which obviously isn't the best thing for pretty much anybody. Thor has set up his new Asgard where New York once was, from which he controls the entire world. Thor also now has a son with Amora the Enchantress called Magni. Now Magni grows up to become what Thor once was, eventually even becoming worthy of Mjolnir himself, which, side note, Thor had lied and said that the hammer was actually destroyed, but it's not, obviously. Magni, being a hero, became very ashamed of his father after realizing all the ways in which his father had abused and messed up his rule of Asgard. Magni brings Mjolnir to Thor and challenges him to lift the hammer as a test of whether this old, grizzled Thor is truly worthy of leading Asgard. Now, a whole bunch of things happen that aren't really worth explaining, including the return of Desak, Loki unleashing the Destroyer armor, again, and the Designates showing up to try and put humanity on a better course with Thor. The reason I say it doesn't really matter is that I believe above everything else that happens, and his kingdom falling apart around him, the fact that Magni is ashamed of Thor is what leads Thor to do what he does next. Thor realizes the mistakes he's made, and so he uses the Tomorrow Man's technology to go back in time around 200 years to when Asgard was attacked by the combined countries. Before they can blow up Asgard, he tells them that Asgard will leave if they stop. He intervenes before his younger self takes the life of Jake Olsen, and he uses the Odin Force power to merge together younger Thor with Jake Olsen again, restoring Thor's humanity and erasing this reigning timeline, while making sure to also impart the wisdom that Thor had learned over the past 200 years to make sure that his younger self doesn't do what his older self ended up doing, if that makes sense. Now we move on to the new timeline. So, it's a little confusing from where Thor left things. There are still a few questions that I would have. For example, Asgard had still invaded Earth and been solving problems and simultaneously causing a whole ton of issues, and Thor's dual life as Jake Olsen is presumably a thing still, but all those questions and problems go unanswered, and it's almost as if none of it actually happened at all. Instead, in this new timeline, starting with issue 80 of volume 2, Odin has still died at the hands of Surtur, and Thor is the Lord of Asgard again, though he oddly no longer wields the Odin Force. We don't learn much in terms of the events that take place on Earth. Instead, the story picks up during the funeral of some dwarven smiths. Unknown to others, they had passed at the hands of Loki, who had stolen the forge that created Mjolnir. Loki had also brought back Surtur from the dead in order to use the forge to create more Uru hammers, as well as bring about Ragnarok. To get that on the move, Loki has put together a team of some of Thor's greatest threats, Ulik the Troll and Hiram the Giant, plus their armies, as well as freeing his own son, Fenris Wolf. Together they interrupt the funeral with a surprise attack wielding the weapons that Surtur had created. Thor gets his butt handed to him pretty badly, and when all the hammers, Mjolnir plus Ulik, Fenris, and Hiram's hammers, all strike each other simultaneously during the fight, Mjolnir is shattered. Thor is almost taken down by Loki, who blasts him into the waters of the Midgard Serpent, but Thor escapes to Midgard and gets help help from Captain America and Iron Man. Now together these three heroes go to Asgard only to find it in shambles. They are surprise attacked by Loki and his forces, but with this new help, Thor is able to come out victorious, dispatching both Ulik the Troll and Hiram the Giant. Unfortunately, Loki and the rest of his forces retreat and escape. Now in the aftermath of Loki's attack on Asgard, Baldur, Thor's half-brother plus Thor's mother Frigga, have also been killed in Loki's attack. Thor visits Alfheim, the home of the Light Elves, only to find it leveled by Loki's forces. Volstagg is here, but the other members of the Warriors 3 have also perished. Now Thor leads his army to Vanaheim, where they come into conflict with Fenris Wolf and his forces, and with the help of Beta Ray Bill, Fenris Wolf is defeated, but this victory still rings hollow for Thor. Thor leaves Beta Ray Bill as ruler in place as he goes off to Hiddlestaff to figure out what Ragnarok means and how to actually defeat Loki. Now we move into Rune King Thor. While Thor is in Hiddlestaff, he finds himself visited by a spirit of a young boy who is accompanied by two ravens, the ravens of Odin. This spirit is actually the personification of the Odin Force. The Force reveals that Thor had proved himself unready for the power it offers due to his actions during the initial timeline, the one where he ended up ruling Earth. So, in order to gain that power back, Thor needed to gain the wisdom his father had, or, in other words, he needs to follow the path of the Allfather. Thor needs to do what Odin did in order to gain the wisdom that Odin has. So, Thor goes to the Well of Mimir. This is where, in Norse mythology, Odin gouged out his own eye to gain wisdom. Thor does the same thing, but the Odin Force tells Thor this is not enough, as Odin has already done this. So, to take the path not already taken, Thor takes out his other eye as well. This act fills the Well of Mimir and allows Thor to drink. The well's water allows Thor to see into the past and learn that Ragnarok is actually a never-ending cycle of rebirth. In order to gain even more knowledge and wisdom, the Odin Force says that Thor has to be reborn just as Odin had done. When Odin did the same thing, he hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and 9 nights until Odin was at the brink of death. Thor has to go beyond even that though, and so Thor hangs himself from the tree until he actually passes away. But thanks to that, he's granted the power to know the past, control the present, and guide the future. He can see through the veil of time, see beyond quantum structure and cosmic architecture. I'm just quoting the comic here, that's what it said. He basically gains rune magic, meaning he can see everything that will come to pass in the future, but he also passed away. When Thor wakes up, naturally, he is in Hell, and just before Hela can actually claim his soul, he makes a rune mark in the ground and Odin's spirit rescues Thor from the afterlife. He then wakes up again, but this time, he wakes up in front of a group of black and white beings who call themselves those who sit above in shadow. Now, these guys are essentially the gods of gods. They are more powerful than the gods of Asgard, essentially. Who these characters are specifically is a bit of a comic book unanswered mystery. Loki has stated them to possibly be the super powerful extra-dimensional beings known as the Beyonders from the later Secret Wars story. Now this might be true, it might not. He just said they are like the Beyonders, so we don't actually know. But essentially, they survive off the cycle of Ragnarok. The life force from all the Asgardians is what gives these beings their power, so Thor vows to break the cycle as Odin, through Thor and his actions as a hero, had found a way to do just that. And Thor just leaves. Thor is now powered by both the Odin Force and rune magic. He travels to Asgard and finds it rebuilt by Loki. Here, he is attacked by the Mangog, one of the most powerful beings ever that Thor has struggled with and been defeated by multiple times. Even Odin fears the Mangog, but Thor defeats the Mangog simply by putting his hand on him. It almost looks like Thor kind of like erases Mangog from existence and like blows him to the wind. It's kind of actually hilarious, but insane. Next, Thor confronts Loki. Knowing all the thoughts in Loki, he easily defeats Loki's army without even really moving, and then he just kind of rips Loki's head off with one arm. Although Loki keeps talking, Loki is now no longer a threat, so he carries Loki's head with him as he heads to Surtur. At this point, even the Odin Force is like, okay, honestly, I have no idea what you're going to do now, and I am excited, which is actually hilarious. Now, Thor gets Surtur to repair Mjolnir in exchange for a free pass at Asgard for Surtur to attack and give the Asgardians a final glorious battle, bringing on the cycle of Ragnarok. While that is happening, Rune King Thor now goes to the Tapestry of Fate, which is a tapestry attached attached to the world tree that essentially tells how reality will play out all the way up to Ragnarok. At that point, thanks to those who sit above in shadow, the tapestry will be rewoven and the cycle will repeat. Those who sit above in shadow show up in a last-ditch effort to beg Thor not to do what he is about to do, even offering him a place among them. But instead of allowing the tapestry to be remade, Rune King Thor lifts up his hammer and with one strike, he destroys the tapestry, those who sit above in shadow, the world tree itself, and basically all of reality.
Are you missing the more tragic and disturbing aspects of the Hulk after seeing him dab and say bruh over the last few years in the MCU? If so, you are in for a treat, because today we will be exploring one of the darkest and scariest Hulk stories ever released by Marvel. I'm Andrew Boyd, and today on Top 10 Nerd I will be attempting to explain the first 10 issues of Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk. Immortal Hulk is quite different from many other modern Hulk stories that tend to be cosmic action stories like Planet Hulk, and instead tries to return the character to his roots by telling an incredibly dark and disturbing horror story that explores the nature of good and evil and the gray area in between. It is a 50-issue arc that would be much too long to get into in one video, so we will be taking a look at the first 10 issues, and if you want, we might continue this deep dive in an eventual part 2 and beyond. Issue 1 begins with a quote by Carl Jung that sets the tone for the story. Man is on the whole less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. At a gas station, a teenage girl is shopping for a drink while a drifter looks at a newspaper that talks about how the Hulk is assumed dead. An armed robber comes in and tries to rob the cashier, but is spooked when the girl drops a glass bottle in shock at the sight of him. He instinctively turns and shoots the girl. The drifter is shocked at this and starts to get angry. Before we can find out if the robber will like him when he's angry, he shoots the drifter in the head, seemingly killing him. The cashier begs for his life, but not wanting to leave any witnesses, the robber kills him too. We are then introduced to a reporter named Jackie McGee. She is clearly a riff on the investigative reporter Jack McGee, who was hunting the Hulk in the classic 1970s Incredible Hulk television series. Jackie is covering the robbery for the local paper and is informed by the local police captain that they are not optimistic about finding the murderer. Meanwhile, in the morgue across town, night falls and the drifter comes back to life, transforming into the Hulk. Hulk goes after the distraught robber, who we learn was only stealing to try and pay off a debt to a local biker gang so he can support his family. Hulk attacks the gang and chases the robber, who he soon corners. Hulk, who by the way is extremely articulate in this series, asks if the gun made him feel powerful and if he secretly wanted to shoot those people to feel that power unleashed. The robber begs for mercy, saying that it was a mistake. I'm not a bad guy, am I? Hulk closes in on him, retorting, "What do you think?" The next day, Jackie is talking to the police in the hospital. The entire gang has been severely injured, and the robber may never wake up and has almost broken every bone in his body. The police reveal to Jackie that the gang members are claiming that it was the work of the Hulk, and that Bruce Banner must not be dead. In a nearby motel room, Bruce sits contemplating his own morality, asking his reflection if he is a bad person. Issue 2 begins with Bruce having a nightmare about the hours after his exposure to the gamma bomb when he was believed to be in the walking ghost phase. The walking ghost phase is a real term used to describe the hours after exposure to severe radiation where the body has yet to show symptoms of the horrible death that is to come. Bruce remembers the terror of feeling fine, but hearing the clicking of the Geiger counter telling him that this was not the case. The frustration of this triggered a Hulk out. As Bruce wakes up, we learn about what his life has become. He is on the run, owning nothing, not even the clothes on his back, which he always loses when the Hulk comes out. He survives by begging or stealing what he can during the day, but remarks that the night belongs to the Hulk. This is a throwback to the very first Hulk comics, where rather than being triggered by rage, Banner's Hulkouts were triggered by the rising and falling sun. This was the cause of the transformations until Incredible Hulk number 4, when Bruce began triggering the transformations with the use of a machine. It wasn't until about a year later in Tales to Astonish number 60 when the Hulkouts began to be triggered by emotional outbursts. Bruce has found found that the Hulk is able to guide him to situations where he is needed with an almost psychic accuracy, and has been spending his time trying to do good to atone for his past sins. This brings him to a small town where several people are dying one after each other. This chain of grief started with the death of the town's star quarterback, whose father was a doctor specializing in radiation treatment. Bruce visits the graveyard and realizes that the quarterback's grave is giving off gamma radiation, and that the string of deaths is a result of people visiting the grave, getting radiation poisoning, dying, and then infecting their loved ones when their graves are visited. Bruce tries to call in an anonymous tip to the government, but in order to be believed, has to reveal his identity to the operator. He climbs a mountain and finds a glowing green cave, where he discovers the radiation doctor, Dr. Fry, who has been transformed into a glowing green ghost-like gamma creature. A walking ghost, if you will. He is surrounded by the dead bodies of people who discovered the cave that he has been killing in order to avoid them knowing he is alive. He attacks Bruce, but Hulk comes out. Fry admits to the Hulk that after his wife died, he started fearing death, and in order to avoid it, created his own gamma formula inspired by Banner's work. It seemed to work with no side effects, so when his son announced that he was going away to play football at college, Fry gave him the formula to help him avoid injury on the field. Unfortunately, it turned out that the reason Fry hadn't had any adverse effects was because he had developed a minor tolerance to gamma radiation due to his constant exposure to it through his work. His son got sick fast, bleeding green out of his eyes and throwing up green bile worthy of Danny DeVito's Penguin. The son started talking about how he could see a green door below them and that someone was looking through it. He died, and soon after, Fry began transforming into a gamma creature. Hulk explains the consequences that his actions have had on the town, and Fry begs for his life as he is still afraid of death. Hulk tears off his limbs and buries him in the cave, sealing off the entrance, leaving him to spend eternity buried alive and alone. The issue ends with Fry reconsidering his position and screaming and begging for a death that will not come. Something I can relate to as someone who saw X-Men Dark Phoenix in theaters. Issue 3. Jackie McGee is interviewing people who witnessed an incident involving the Hulk and the villain Hotshot. Each witness is giving a very different perspective on the events, with each of their stories being drawn in a different art style. Hotshot had taken a church hostage because he believed that his girlfriend Jess had been possessed, and he wanted to get her an exorcism. Like Dr. Fry's son, she had been rambling about a green door that she had been seeing in visions. Hulk busts in and stops Hotshot, and Jess is found dead in a motel with her head spun the wrong way around. The words "green door" have been scrawled on the wall. Hotshot is blamed for her death and hangs himself in prison soon after. Jackie puts the story together, but gets a phone call from Walter Lenkowski, aka Sasquatch of Alpha Flight. He also wants to find Bruce as he needs help with an issue he is having with his Sasquatch side. Issue 4. Walter arrives in South Dakota to talk to McGee. He explains his origin to her. Although a Canadian, he was attending Penn State University on a football scholarship, where he was rooming with a young Bruce Banner, who had transferred to Penn for a semester to use their gamma facilities. Although most considered Walter a jock, he also had a passion for science and was inspired by his roommate to start learning about gamma and became his research assistant. Bruce would sometimes go off on Walter, resenting the fact that he was already beloved as a football player and was trying to also become a gamma scientist, something Bruce considered his territory. Walter went on to be a football star until he saw on the news what Bruce had become. He made it his mission to replicate Banner's work in a more controlled fashion, and using his NFL fortune and help and funding from the Canadian government's superhero monitoring agency, Department H, conducted an experiment quite similar to the one that transformed Banner into the Hulk in both the 70s TV show and the 2008 MCU film. The goal was to create a creature that could act as a deterrent for the Hulk, but as the experiment was conducted in the Arctic Circle, where the walls of reality are thinner, Walter became Sasquatch and saw the green door. A demon known as Tanarak entered him and started causing trouble, but that issue was dealt with all the way back in Alpha Flight Volume 1, Issue 23, and Walter insists that he has been demon-free ever since. Now that I've gone on my traditional tangent about Alpha Flight, let's get back to The Hulk. Walter's story causes Jackie to remember an incident when she was a child, where the Hulk went on a rampage in her hometown when she was a child and she saw him, developing a lifelong obsession with the Jade Giant. She and Walter begin tailing Bruce, stopping at bars where he has been spotted to try and find out where he is going. At one of these bars, a fight breaks out, and while trying to break it up, Walter is stabbed in the back. He is forced to experience every Canadian's worst nightmare while traveling in the States and is taken to the hospital for a no doubt very expensive surgery. While sitting in the waiting room, Jackie wonders why Walter didn't transform into Sasquatch when he was stabbed. Bruce shows up and talks to Jackie, telling her that they need to evacuate the hospital. In the operating room, Walter transforms into Sasquatch and begins attacking the surgeons. Issue 5. Issue 5 begins with a flashback aboard the Alpha Flight space station. Although originally Canada's greatest super team, Marvel has changed this so that they have become an international task force operating in space, being led by Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel. Now, I am not a fan of this. I mean, no disrespect to Captain Marvel, but why the f isn't an American in charge of Alpha Flight? It's our one cool super team. Ugh. Anyways, stay on topic, Andrew. This isn't an Alpha Flight video, it's a video about the Hulk. Anyways, in this flashback, Carol Danvers tells Sasquatch that the team is concerned that he is getting more aggressive in the field. Longtime team member Puck points out that it is becoming increasingly rare that Walter is seen in his human form. Walter brushes off their concerns, but when in private, discovers that it is becoming more and more difficult for him to return to his human form. In the present at the hospital, Banner gets McGee to evacuate the hospital while he goes to confront Sasquatch, who has eaten his entire surgical team. Bruce asks Walter if they can talk, but Sasquatch says, "I'm not Walter," and attacks Bruce, triggering his transformation into the Hulk. They fight, and Hulk deduces that Walter stayed in his Sasquatch form too long, and as a result, something got into him through the green door. The demon controlling Sasquatch reveals that he is actually the spirit of Bruce's evil dead father, Brian Banner. Now, Brian is a piece of work who is responsible for a lot of the trauma in Bruce's life and the death of his mother. He has fought Bruce multiple times over the years and is one of the few people that Bruce and the Hulk fear. This causes the Hulk to struggle in the fight before he realizes that it is Bruce who has a reason to fear Brian, not him. Brian reveals that he is being used as a host personality for some other being known as the One Below All. He uses Walter's claws to blind Hulk. Brian corners McGee, but Hulk absorbs the gamma in Walter's body, causing him to transform back into his human form. Hulk allows McGee to ask him one question. She asks how to become like him, and Hulk tells her to go home and leaves. Walter wakes up and realizes he no longer has the power to transform into Sasquatch. Hulk realizes that when he absorbed Walter's gamma, he also absorbed Brian Banner into him. Issue 6. Bruce is in a motel. He only has hazy memories of what happened at the hospital, but knows that Hulk has absorbed something from Walter, and therefore hasn't let the Hulk out in 2 days. Hulk writes a note to Banner telling him they must return home. In California, Bruce's wife, Betty Ross, watches reports about the Hulk on the news and reasons that it can't be him, as if Bruce was alive, he surely would have reached out. We discover that her and the Hulk's other allies are being watched by an organization known as the Shadow Base. They have found Dr. Fry and are trying to use him to create a creature that can battle the Hulk. In order to find the Hulk, they decide to use the recent incident with Sasquatch to their advantage. On Alpha Flight space station, Walter is being examined by longtime teammate Shaman, who suspects that the force that took him over was creation's other dark half, the One Below All. Captain Marvel comes in and reveals that the US government is wanting to extradite Walter and have him put to death for his involvement in the hospital incident. The only way to prevent this is to capture the Hulk and hand him over to the government with the help of a super team that it actually makes sense for her to be a member of, the Avengers. In Iowa, Bruce is making his way home to the Gamma test site where the Hulk was born. Hulk believes that the extra power of the site will give him the strength to defeat Brian. Danvers shows up with the Avengers and tries to take him into custody, but he transforms into the Hulk and prepares to take on his former teammates. Issue 7. Hulk fights the Avengers, managing to take out Thor, Captain America, Black Panther, Iron Man, and She-Hulk, while Captain Marvel works to evacuate a nearby town. Iron Man is weirdly eager to try out a weapon known as the Helios laser. They fire it and it reduces the whole town to ash and turns Bruce into crispy bits. He is turned over to the Shadow Base, who split him into separate pieces and keep the various body parts in jars to prevent Hulk from healing while they study him. The scientists at the Shadow Base are studying Hulk's healing factor as they continue to torture the vivisected hero. On Alpha Flight Space Station, Danvers tells McGee about how the Hulk has been taken by the US government without a trace, as anyone who could give them information has become unreachable. Although he no longer has his powers, Walter is still an expert in gamma radiation and is put in charge of a new team by Captain Marvel with the mission of locating the Hulk. They call themselves Gamma Flight as a bit of an inside joke, although there actually was already a Marvel team known as Gamma Flight. You see, back when Alpha Flight operated under the Canadian government, they had various training teams that heroes would join while they worked their way up to the main team, one of which was Gamma Flight. Ugh. Focus, Andrew, it's not an Alpha Flight video. Hulk, you're talking Hulk! In the lab, Hulk reveals that he has been allowing the scientists to study him so that he can better understand himself, and could have escaped at any time. He snaps his fingers, creating a shockwave that shatters the jars, allowing his various body parts to reassemble. He absorbs the cruel scientist who has been torturing him, and escapes to make his way to the Gamma Bomb site. Issue 9. The villain Bushwhacker is working for the Shadow Base and is tracking the Hulk as he continues on his journey. The Shadow Base has made a deal with Carl Creel, aka the Absorbing Man, and have been experimenting on him to make him stronger so that he can defeat the Hulk. The experiments give him the ability to absorb gamma power and turns his skin red. Hulk gets to the base but realizes that it was actually Brian Banner's idea to go there so that he could get rid of the Hulk. Hulk is about to leave when he is attacked by Absorbing Man. They fight, but Hulk grows weaker and emaciated every time he lands a blow. Creel absorbs too much of Hulk's power and ends up absorbing Brian Banner and the One Below All. Absorbing Man's consciousness is transported to another realm where the One Below All appears before him in a form Creel can comprehend, and tells him that as a creature of pride, he was always going to end up in hell. Back on Earth, Creel's body tears itself apart in front of a shocked Hulk. Issue 10. Aboard Alpha Flight Space Station, Walter gets a positive ID on Hulk's gamma signature and sets out with Gamma Flight and McGee to track him down. Creel is still stuck in the other realm and cries about how sorry he is. Back on Earth, his mutilated body repeats the words to an unimpressed Hulk, but continues to attack him. Hulk rips out Absorbing Man's spine and uses it to beat the crap out of him. Jackie, Puck, and Walter show up in a ship to try and speak to Hulk, but Bushwhacker uses a sniper rifle to take a shot at Hulk, making Hulk think that Gamma Flight is firing on him. He is sent into a blind rage, and with a thunderous Hulk smash, takes out the ship. Hulk comes to his senses when he sees Creel running towards the test site. He realizes that Brian's plan was to absorb more gamma radiation so he could open the green door. Before he can go after Creel, Puck shoots him with a plasma rifle. Creel absorbs the gamma radiation and opens the green door, transporting Hulk, Jackie, Puck, Walter, and Bushwhacker into the other realm. Jackie asks where they are, and the Hulk turns to her and says, "Welcome to hell." Well, that is the first 10 issues of Immortal Hulk. Hopefully this taste of the story will encourage you to pick up and read this great 50-issue series.